Hey guys, it's Droid Protocol here. I've just recently finished construction of these Protocol Droid shorts. They're completely handmade from PVC, but I just wanted to show you a little long play of how I added these striped details on the back, and I'll just talk you through what I'm doing. So the first thing I do is I've worked out how wide I wanted these details to be. So I've determined that they need to be a centimeter. Along the top edge of the back where there's that little scalloped out section, I've already added a 1 centimeter wide bead around the top, and I've done a bit of sanding to kind of round that off a bit. But this is how I actually build basically all of my droids. I take this flat PVC foam board, or it's also known as Sintra, and essentially all I'm doing here is just cutting a strip, a 1 centimeter strip. So now that I've just drawn my pencil line with a ruler, rather than trying to hold a ruler and cut on the ruler's edge, I've done that before and I've actually ended up cutting myself rather than the board. So these days I just tend to freehand cut the parts that I need. And then I can basically just use a piece of sandpaper to smooth off the edges. If it's really bad, like if I'm cutting a complicated shape, for example, I might use a bit more sandpaper to kind of get the edges to be a bit smoother. But generally, just after the number of years that I've been doing this, I'm pretty good at freehand cutting. And essentially now I've got the pieces that I need. I can just figure out where they've got to go. So I've done one side and I'm just essentially measuring the gaps just to kind of replicate it on this side. But you'll see here, I've drawn a line on my cutting board. This is just so I can get the same contour in the bend for the next pieces that I'm making. So now I'm just going to apply a little bit of heat. Now I have to be careful because I'm bending this on a flat plane rather than bending it over onto itself. I have to be careful not to apply too much heat, because what tends to happen with PVC is it expands and slightly contracts. So on that flat corner, it would actually start to shrink and become a little bit more narrow. So I'm just being gentle not to apply too much heat and trying to keep it as flat as possible so that I can bend the material on its flat surface, on its flat plane, and keep it like nice and smooth all the way around that corner or that radius. So I'm just also making sure that it matches the contour, because I want my pieces to be pretty close to being exactly the same. And you can see that they look perfect. It makes that nice Y shape that I'm looking for. So now I'm just going to trim the top edge to a bit of an angle so that it will sit flush along the bead across the top of the hips. And then it will have a nice little clean seam that I can fill in later. And I'm just cutting off the length just to make it match. Off camera, I drew a little guideline just to match the opposite side and just ensure that I'm tracking it down the back of the thigh, just so it matches the other side. And I'm just going to use a bit of glue on the back of this piece and just glue it into place. The glue I use is exclusively a product called Mitre Kit. It's from a brand called Sudal. I get this from my local hardware, but it's not available at all hardwares, but you can buy it online, and it's probably the best product I've ever purchased because it's cheap, and I can get it in a 100 gram bottle, which is this bottle that I'm using now. And the product comes with its own accelerant spray. And for those of you who don't use super glue products or cyanoacrylate products, you probably don't know what accelerant is, but it's essentially a product that when you spray onto the super glue, it sets instantly. So it makes construction of things like this really quick for me, because not only is the gel glue a really strong product, it also has like a bit of a filling capability because it's quite thick. So I can just basically press the parts that I need to glue in place and spray one end, and it's instantly set. And then I can just follow the line that I've already drawn on and just glue the rest of it as I go. Especially under the little bum cheek thing here, there's a bit of a dip, so it's really important that I press the plastic down and get that secured before I flatten off the rest of it, because I don't want any raised areas. I need to make sure it's all pressed firmly onto the surface before I can spray it and glue it into place. And there you have it, a nice detailed piece glued in, and that's permanently secured, and it's very, very strong. This glue is really amazing, and essentially every single PVC droid that I've built so far has been exclusively made with this particular brand of super glue. Something else I want to tell you about is just all that grey stuff you can see there. That's essentially a filler I made out of 3D printer resin. And what I do with my PVC parts, especially if they're really complicated curves like this, because there's so many separate pieces to build this shape, that you end up getting a lot of seam lines and a lot of super glue, and you kind of get different levels on the surface. So what I do is I use some really coarse sandpaper, like a 40 grit, to really knock it down. And then any like dips or cracks or holes, I use this filler that I make usually with talcum powder, but I had no talcum powder left, and I ended up using tapioca starch, which works just as well, and it's really cheap. So I basically just mix 3D printer resin and the starch together to make a paste, and then I just apply it with a spatula and then sand it smooth. Just makes, kind of finishing this piece or any part really much easier to get a nice smooth surface, and then apply your detail pieces like these strips later. Because if I tried to glue all the detail pieces first and then sand, it just becomes much more complicated. So it's just easier for me, and that's just the way I do things now, is I have nice big flat surfaces to sand, and then I can just add detail parts on. Another thing I'll mention is, just while I'm talking on this subject, this particular piece was really complicated because I had to physically manipulate the shape of the butt cheeks with a basketball and my heat gun, but I was able to push the basketball down, heat it up, and just kind of stretch the material over the basketball. But it was fairly challenging, but it ended up working exactly how I needed it to, and now I've got a perfect fitting pair of shorts. So just to apply the last piece, just like I did before, I'm just adding my glue. I'm just going to put it into place, manipulate it, and secure it with the accelerant spray. But this is essentially how I build my entire droid projects out of PVC. Just cut your parts, glue them together with super glue. There's more than one way to skin a cat, obviously, but I prefer to use super glue just because the construction process is really fast. I do know there's people that use PVC cement to laminate parts together, and that you can do, but it's a very long gluing process, whereas I like to work quickly, and this is much more efficient for me. And PVC and super glue are best friends. They bond so strongly that there's really no need to use any other type of cement. And you can just build things so fast, and that's why I like to do it this way. So that's my process. That's how I build things with PVC. And as you can see, it's fairly simple, fairly straightforward. There's very similar techniques to construction with EVA foam, except you just don't have the flexibility of EVA foam. This material does require a little bit of heat and a little bit more understanding of its flexibility. But once you get the hang of it, you can build some really crazy things. So that's me done. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.